Good morning, commissioners, Chief Choi, Ms. Farber, Madam Secretary, Mr. Inspector General, Mr. City Attorney, members of the public. Today is March 8th, 2022. It is 9:34 a.m. This is a special meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning, Commissioner Briggs.
Present.
Commissioner Decker. Oh, absent, I'm sorry. Commissioner Bonner.
Here.
Commissioner Kalanche.
She's not present.
Also not present, thank you. Commissioner Sobroff.
Here.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Also present, we have the Executive Director, the Inspector General, the City Attorney, and sitting in for the Chief of Police, we have Assistant Chief Choi.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We welcome everyone attending this morning. All public comment will be heard during item 2 on the agenda. We will dedicate a total of 45 minutes to public comment. Members of the public will have 1 minute per agenda item for a maximum of 2 minutes total. At the request of the speaker will be given 1 additional minute for general public comment for a maximum of 3 minutes total. Members of the public who participate in public comment are reminded that they can speak to any item on the agenda or a matter within the jurisdiction of Board of Police Commissioners. Public comment is your opportunity to address the board, so you are free to express your opinion on matters before the board and to generally express when you disagree with other opinions expressed. However, directing your comments to other individuals who have spoken or attacking others who have expressed their opinion shall be deemed off topic and your public comment period will be concluded. Members of the public, if you choose to participate in public comment portion of the agenda, you can participate in this meeting in one of a number of ways that are outlined on your agenda. Before I turn to item 1 on the agenda, I'd like to say something because today is International Women's Day. I want to salute all of the women in the Los Angeles Police Department, both sworn and civilian. All of you have dedicated your lives to public safety. All of you have endured sacrifices for our city. Some of you have even put your lives on the line for our citizens. I want to say on behalf of the Board of Police Commissioners that we honor you and are proud that you are part of this organization. And I want all of you to know that the mayor and this commission are committed to gender equality within the LAPD. We are committed to actively seeking more women officers. We are committed to actively promoting qualified women to the highest ranks of this department. There is much work to be done with regard to achieving gender equality. I want all women of the department to know that this Board of Police Commissioners has and will continue to have your backs. The department has some excellent examples of women who have risen through its ranks. Assistant Chief Gurmala, Deputy Chief Tangrides, and Commander Flores, to name a few. We must do better and promote more women through the ranks of this department, and that is a priority of the mayor and this commission. Thank you. Chief Choi, I turn to you for item 1 on the agenda.
Good morning, Commission President Briggs, Commissioners, Inspector General Smith, and City Attorney Carlos De La Guerra, and Madam Secretary. So I just want to start off by Commissioner Briggs parroting what you just said about women in Los Angeles, women in LAPD. The chief also sets this as a priority. We can do better, but it is something that we're striving to do. You've just named off some fantastic, incredible leaders, women leaders in this organization. Also to mention Regina Scott, who's recently retired. These are all women who've worked hard and made it through the ranks, and we're going to continue to identify the up and comers and continue to put them in positions of leadership and make sure that we are continuing to put gender equality in the forefront of our hiring and promotional process. So that being said, today for the chief's comments, I'm going to provide a COVID update. I'm going to talk about a couple of significant events from last week. and then I'll provide a crime update as well as discussing our personnel strength. So for our COVID update, we are currently at week ending March 5th, we're at 83.3% fully vaccinated. That's 10,221 employees. We are at 0.4% partially vaccinated, which is 52 employees. And we're at 16.2% not vaccinated, or 1,990 employees. I'm happy to say that last week we had only eight new COVID infections. 5 were actually true new infections. 3 were late reports that came in. So we really had 5 new infections. This is the lowest infection rate that we've seen since June of 2021. We're looking at our 14-day average. That equates to about 0.3 per day, or 1 infection every 3 days. And I'd like to say that 7 of those 8 employees that were reported infected were fully vaccinated. I know in previous reports we talked about 51% of our new infections were fully vaccinated. This particular series of individuals, 7 of 8 of them were fully vaccinated. We still have 1 employee that's still hospitalized long-term. We continue to pray for that employee's recovery. There are 74 employees that are home recovering from COVID at this time. But I'm also happy to report that the average days that it takes for somebody to return to work when they're exposed to COVID or tested positive for COVID has been reduced significantly. We started off about a month or 2 ago with 22 days, then went down to 19. We're at below 10 days now for employees to come back to work. I think it just shows us that this Omicron is people are recovering quickly, especially if they're vaccinated, and they're coming back to work by and large without any significant challenges. We do have 14 employees that are not in compliance with the vaccination mandate. That's 13 sworn and 1 civilian. Out of those 14, 3 of them have been terminated at boards of rights, and we have 7 additional employees pending boards of rights. And then finally, we have 2,234 pending exemption requests, both religious and medical. And part of the medical are those that have recently tested positive for COVID. They get a 90-day exemption before they're mandated to test again. The department has created a flow chart that makes it easy for all of our employees to understand what process is going to take place when we review exemptions. That's been distributed to all those that have filed for exemptions. And we will begin reviewing these exemptions and working with personal departments starting this week. Moving on to significant events. So Chief Moore hosted his biannual Muslim Community Forum last Thursday night. He introduced the Inspector General and discussed the overall role of the Office of the Inspector General, including the Inspector General's role in providing oversight of the department on behalf of the Police Commission. He introduced Assistant Chief Robert Moreno and provided a brief overview of his role as a Director of Office of Special Operations. And he also introduced Commander Ruby Flores and provided an overview of her role as the department's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. He also made some comments on the conflict in Ukraine. And he really supported and reiterated the fact that this department is prepared to support all peaceful demonstrations related to this issue. And in closing on this particular topic, Chief Moore asked Community Relations Section to put together an in-person training session with community members at geographic divisions specific to Muslim-related topics to engage that community in more interaction with the police department. Chief also attended a memorial ceremony. So on March 3rd, 2022, this was Thursday, Newton area hosted a memorial ceremony for fallen officer Jose Anzora. It was his 1-year anniversary. So Officer Anzora was struck by a vehicle while directing traffic on February 26, 2021. His injuries were too severe. He didn't overcome them. He succumbed to those injuries on March 3rd, 2021. Officer Anzora is survived by his wife, his mother, and his 3 brothers. Additionally, a street sign was also created and dedicated in his name. Chief Moore would like to thank Commissioner Decker, Commissioner Bonner, and Councilmember Price, who were in attendance and spoke a few words on his behalf. We had over 100 officers and community members that attended the ceremony. And then on March 5th, he also attended a funeral for Forensic Print Specialist 3 Bobby Chun. Bobby Chun was assigned to Technical Investigations Division. He worked for the LAPD for 5 years, and he is survived by his wife, 3 children, and brother and his mother. And lastly, regarding significant incidents, there were no categorical use of forces or FID callouts this past week. We're thankful for that. Moving on to crime. So we continue to gain some ground in the area of homicides. 2 weeks ago, we were down about 16.9%. We are now down 17.8%, which is 13 fewer homicides year to date compared to last year. We also continue to gain ground in the areas of victims shot. 2 weeks ago, we were down 10.5%. This prior week, we are now down 12.1%, which is 34 fewer shooting victims compared to last year this time. However, in this area, we're still up significantly from our 2020 numbers, and there's still work to do in this area. These are both critical areas of our crime fighting strategy. We'll continue to work on that. Overall, our violent crime is up 3.7%. That's an additional 181 violent crimes compared to last year. We're still challenged in the area of robberies when it comes to violent crime. 2 weeks ago, we were up in robberies 13.7%. This past week, we are now up 16%, which is an increase of 225 robberies compared to last year the same time. The primary location in which their premise code where these robberies are occurring is still the street and parkways, where we had 478 of these robberies occurring. However, where we're seeing the largest increase in locations are, and it was spoken about in the last couple chief's comments. So mini marts, gas stations, and liquor stores still have the highest increase in premise code, where these are the increase in where these robberies are occurring, and that increase is this prior week was at 47.7%. We've also seen a significant increase with these robberies where firearms are being used. So year to date, robberies with firearms has increased 38.6%, or an additional 165 robberies that involve firearms compared to 2021. And if you look at our 2020 numbers and the number of firearms being used, there's been an increase of 52.6% this year, or a total of 204 robberies with firearms involved. 77th and Southeast continue to lead the city in the highest number of 211s or robberies with firearms. We've had 22 this last period in 77th and 27 in Southeast. So we're going to continue to focus on gun trafficking crimes and gun enhancements during filings and working with the district attorney. So overall, and then moving on to property crime, overall property crime is up 3.7% as well, but this is an increase of 582 crimes. Where we continue to have challenges in our property crime is with burglaries, motor vehicle theft, and then personal theft / other theft. So we had a 3% increase year to date in our burglaries. We had a 5.8% increase in our motor vehicle thefts, and we had a 7.8% increase in our personal theft and other thefts. Overall, Part 1 crime, having said all that, is up 3.7%, which is a total of 763 more crimes this year versus last year, same time period. Regarding our officer-involved shootings, as of March 5th this year, we've had 4 officer-involved shootings, one of those being fatal, compared to last year in 2021, same time period, where we had 4 OISs, officer-involved shootings, with 1 fatal as well. So moving on to our personnel strength. For our sworn personnel deployed, we're at 9,440 sworn. Now, if you remember this prior report, we're at 9,505. We had a significant decrease in our sworn deployed. So we are under deployed strength compared to our sworn authorities by 266. The reason for this, I looked into it, and in the month of February, we saw a spike or a significant number of resignations and retirements. So we had 4 resignations and 82 retirements that we can confirm from February 1st to February 16th. Now I thought this was significant, but what I'm being told is not that unusual. We often see an increase in retirements, which this is primarily being driven by in this first quarter of every calendar year. Our civilian personnel deployed remains fairly consistent at 2,686 with an underdeployed strength of 156. Our reserve officers remain consistent at 389. And then our volunteers, 2,221, volunteer specialists, 338, chaplain counselors at 50, and then our cadets at 1,248. So this concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chief Choi. Can you tell me what is the current class at the academy? What are the numbers?
So there's several classes in the academy. Are you talking about the current class that's going to start?
Yes, the current class is going to start.
Oh, I believe that was at 30. I'm going to have to get back to you, but it was nowhere near our goal of 60. In fact, because we've had the last 4 classes that haven't reached the goal of 60, our new goal for each class has gone up to 70 to 74 to make up for our hiring goal at year end of 744.
So at our current pace, we're not even keeping up with the amount of officers that are resigning or retiring. Is that correct?
Currently, we are right about even with attrition, but if our hiring continues to be at the pace that it's at, we're going to hope to keep up with attrition, but I'm not sure if that's going to be possible. One thing that we did do, or we have done, so Chief Moore and I met with the new general manager of personnel department last week, Dana Brown, and we had a great conversation about some of the challenges we're having. And she is 100% supportive and all in to help us overcome some of the challenges we've been having and find out ways to streamline the process, to shorten the hiring process, and get the people we need through the process and into our academies. There is a series of steps that she's going to take and that she's asked us to help her review, and we're in the process of doing that. So we are developing a plan as quickly as possible to increase those numbers coming into the academy. I just don't have those details for you right now.
Great. Thank you, Chief Choi. Commissioner Bonner, do you have any questions for Chief Choi?
I do. Thank you. Just a couple of questions. I'm going back to the COVID report.
Yes.
If I was hearing correctly, was it 13 personnel who were at some stage in the Board of Rights process?
14, yes.
14. And is that an aggregate number being, looking for the entire period that was covered by the mandate, or is it, some subset of that number?
No, it's the entire period. Now, there are going to be, when we go through all the exemptions, things like that, we may find some more that are not in compliance, but as of right now, that who the department identified is either not testing or not vaccinated or both are 14 employees.
Okay. And then what can you speak briefly, if I assume, what is the difference in terms of the any benefits that one might otherwise have when you when you separate from the department? Will any of those personnel who are separated under those circumstances, how will their benefits fare, if at all? In other words, in other words, if you retired, you get retirement, you get a lot of, you get the full suite of benefits you're entitled to as a former city employee. I'm asking, what does that picture look like for someone who's terminated after a Board of Rights?
Well, it would depend on their time and age, right? So for sworn personnel, 20 years of service and 50 years of age, you vest in your pension. If somebody had that time and age on the job and they were terminated, they would still get their pension. If they had not and they were terminated, they wouldn't get their pension. And that would be for whether it's COVID or some other behavior or anything like that.
Got
It's
it.
not specific to COVID.
Got it. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonner. Commissioner Silberoff, do you have any questions for Chief Choi? No questions. At this time, Madam Secretary, we can move to public comment.
Okay, our first speaker is caller ending 5521, followed by Steve Rogers.
Hello there.
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
1, 2, and 3E.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is Bill Watkins from the Rose Hills Community Area, 90032, Hollenbeck Division, patrolled. Thanks for convening. I've been back and forth with another country. And I'm here now in this area, just reporting what I see. I appreciate any efforts to at least raise the level of elevation of the patrol helicopters to a level where the noise wasn't so bad. I don't personally like any of them. Lending to a concept, I really wanted to repitch a concept to LAPD. Really make sure you have consent of the citizenry here for everything you do. Get consent, and that involves going to the mayor's office, right, and working on consent. It involves PR. It involves getting out and polling. Make sure you have consent to carry lethal force as much as you carry, compared to a United Kingdom, which founded our modern policing system in the UK. And they are at 90%, the last I checked, 90% non-lethal, 90% non-lethal policing there. And I think in my travels there, I find they have consent of the citizenry. They have general consent. It's pretty darn good. Back in the 80s, you had your Ireland, you had your problems, but they have consent. And I think PR needs to go out and get consent for lethal force and bring it down a notch if you don't have it. And we need consent on helicopter use. You guys appeal to a 1970 report by NASA that says the two divisions you polled, they sort of said police helicopters were okay and we were okay with them. You're continuing on your website to appeal to that as the citizenry of LA is okay with your choppers. That's disingenuous at best. We need to modernize this grasping for consent. We need to go out and get consent. Your PR's got to get to work there, please. I'm not going to try to take the full 3 minutes. I don't even see my time up right now. With 3E, you're going to take the donation, and that's good. And your martial arts and your dark arts and your arts to defend by sometimes killing, I understand in this world. It's pretty crazy around here. But I hope you're really striving to look for non-lethal approaches and investing and looking for investment in non-lethal defense, which is the true defense. The true defense is not stopping a heart. An attacker's heart does not have to stop for the attack.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Steve Rogers, followed by caller ending 3146.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items did you like to speak on?
1, 2, and 3, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
First, I'd like to say that the United States of America is a constitutional republic where all children of God and all lives matter. I want to acknowledge International Women's Day. I think we should acknowledge women in all their wonderfulness at the LAPD and law enforcement and in life in general. I also want to acknowledge that March is Irish Heritage Month. And I understand that from what I've seen over monitoring these meetings over a period of time, there are some groups whose contributions are acknowledged, but there are others that are not. And I think that we should acknowledge all contributions from all people, from all cultures, from all heritages. And so I call that people acknowledge and recognize Irish Heritage Month. The Irish made a tremendous contribution to law enforcement. And speaking of law enforcement history, there have been some people who have said that LAPD and modern policing is somehow descended from slave catching. That's completely not true. And I just want to call your attention to policing fathers of modern policing. One is August Vollmer, who was at Berkeley. I suggest people look him up. That's Vollmer, August Vollmer, modern policing. And the other is Sir Robert Peel from London, 1829. He was Prime Minister of England. Modern policing principles and the principles of the LAPD even that are posted in the roll call rooms of individual stations come from that. So I want to mention the chief talked about the new COVID cases. Only 7 out of 8, well, actually 7 out of 8 were vaccinated. So I'm going to say what I said last week, which is it's immoral, illogical, and illegal to still implement this medical tyranny. I'm calling for an amnesty for the officers that have been sent to a board of rights or terminated. We only have 9,440 officers. We need all of them. Every single one is important and makes an invaluable contribution. We cannot afford, in a time of rising crime, to be diminishing our force with that type of a nonsensical policy. And quite frankly, it's corrupt. You had Bluestone, which got a no bid contract, forcing officers to pay out of their own pocket. And this is ridiculous. And New York City is already doing away with the vaccine mandates, with the mask mandates. It's time for Los Angeles to really start following the science, which never did support obviously the vaccination is not safe and not effective based on the science. So I wish everyone a good day and a happy March and celebrate Irish heritage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have caller ending 3146, followed by Blue.
Hi, Jonathan Foster.
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
Yes. The chief report, public input, and some of the closed session concept.
Okay, 3 minutes.
And about the commission. I think it's a conflict of interest that the President Briggs has a brother that's on the police department, and I think that's not good. I was listening on the August 3rd, 2021 meeting about the CPABs, and this gentleman, Bill Carter, was talking about how members get together to see what other ones are doing, and this needs oversight. That was during Bonner had asked him some questions, and they need cams, just like the police, the regular old rank and file do. The mayor was mentioned. The mayor is deplorable. So you claim to be the representation of a constitutional police department, and Special Order 40 does not follow the Constitution. That's why I started realizing, man, that the way things are written down, that's not what really takes place with the commission. Like on the Grosario Mac, you have law you have to cite for why the officer was out of policy, and yet someone went against what was written down on paper. This happened with Steve Miller. In the closed session, this is a gentleman that had a fake gun and was in a back alley when they finally shot him. And I know this is a very, very difficult concept. Like, how do you know if it's real or not, right? So more protection for rank and file, which doesn't happen because of the police union and because of the inaction of the commission, leads to this kinds of stuff. So Special Order 40 not being constitutional, you don't do the ICE retainers. This is leading to big, big problems. A little bit of defense. You're being jumped on for all the murders and killings and things like this, but black on black murder is going to exceed what the LAPD kills. Mexican or Spanish speaker murder is going to exceed what the LAPD does. But you're going to get blamed for this, right? Because the scrutiny is on you. And yet, for Black Lives Matter, I wish they would clean that up. That would be a really good thing to help their cause and their voice. You can't have this going around like this. Now, on the Burlington, there were shields, right? Well, the officer needed to take a blood test. Another one, number one cause of crime, not being focused on God. Poverty is not the number one cause of crime. It might be a mental illness, but the number one part is when people are not focused on God, they commit crime. That is the number one cause of crime, is not being focused.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Blue, followed by Betty Lay.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Yes, what items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. First, I want to say thank you to the commissioners and to the chief and the assistant chief for the 45-minute platform. It's plenty of time to listen to this. First, I want to say, the spike in crime is absolutely unacceptable and horrible. And of course, this goes back to our inept district attorney here, who's the major culprit in all this. But hopefully, things will change very soon. And it's disheartening to hear, and we all know this for not having enough police officers in the street and like I've said before, 9,700 for a city of 4 million. It's just the imbalance of numbers, and what these officers are trying to do to keep us safe and stand their ground is appreciated by us who actually live in the communities. And no, I'm not a police officer, and I say this, and if I were, I'd be proud and be honored to do so or be so. But I'm a community member, and I care about my community, and I care about my kids' safety, and I care about our safety. And so thank you to every officer that's out there that's outnumbered and doing what they can. And thank you to the officers who really helped us the night of the Super Bowl while some buffoons were out, hijacking a bus with people on the bus that I'm sure were terrorized and vandalized. Yet you have the naysayers and people that weren't there saying police officers used, lethal, less than lethal rounds and, hurt people, and it was excessive force. And of course, fingers will always be pointed at the police officers again versus the idiots who are out there hijacking people going home after a long day on a city bus trying to get home, vandalizing the city and terrorizing us. So thank you again for our police officers for being patient and trying to rally up these dummies that we couldn't even enjoy a night of a city coming together. And I do want to say that we appreciate the officers going out there and engaging more in the community and more in our schools. And we need to start holding these violent bad people accountable. It brings me to the point of the man running with his baby, an officer tackling him. And of course, the finger is going to be pointed at the police officer. How about holding this man accountable that was running with his baby, using his baby as a human shield and as a weapon to escape from his violence? How about holding him responsible instead of the officer that was probably trying to save the baby and other citizens?
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Betty Lay, followed by Jason R.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
Chief's report, a couple of the agenda items and public comment, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, well, first off, I want to thank Assistant Chief for giving his report. I would like it to be known that on agenda item 3A, I'm really not truly supportive of that. It's like you do your crime, you pay the price. If you're allergic to peanuts or strawberries, just don't eat them. I don't think they should have special meals. I'm just against that. I do support 3C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and J. And I'm totally against this Board of Rights on the 14 officers that are going through this because of not vaccinated. We need every officer that we can get. As they said, sworn right now is 9,440 due to resignation or retirees, and we can't lose an additional 14. And as I've said many times, this Bluestone is corrupted, and there's companies out there that'll do it for free. The money should not come out of our officers' pockets. And with everything calming down, slowing down, the mandate for vaccinations or whatever just need to be gone, need to take off the table altogether. I support LAPD. I support the officers. And I'm really hoping everybody can stay safe and healthy, do the right thing, and please be honest with everything and be transparent so the community knows what's going on. With that, I'm going to yield the rest of my time. Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Jason R. followed by Matios.
All of them, Becky.
Okay, 3 minutes.
All right, so we've been blessed this morning with Dominic Choi, the same pig who couldn't hold back a smile while discussing the murder of Valentina Oriana Peralta. When reporting back on those COVID numbers, you said that 3 were reported late. Bonner, here are some other questions you could have asked. How does one report their COVID infection late? We know that the average amount of days that an LAPD pig was out with COVID was 22 days, and now it's just below 10 days. How are these numbers calculated? Is the 10-day average just for the last week or the last month? Moore said last week during media availability that this bogus change in pretext stops was brought about in the first place because of the manner and number of pretext stops that appeared to have a disproportionate impact on communities of color. Language is important here. Why does the head of this racist department say appears versus does? Again, mathematics are supposed to be a strong point for Mike, and he still can't get he still can't make that conclusion that these pretext stops are anti-Black and clearly racist. His own department statistics prove that these stops target Black people. Show me the stats that disprove this. As a Black man, I'm 5 times more likely to be stopped and 3 times more likely to be searched than everyone else. So this new policy doubles down on stop and frisk on wheels and is a change to the rules of the game that the LAPD runs. So Moore needs to stop ignoring the lived experiences of Black people, his own department's statistics, and come to terms that this is a fact. It doesn't appear, it's a fact, okay? But Mike did say something I agree with during that briefing. He said that hate crimes are underreported, since we never factor in all the hate crimes committed by the LAPD, do we, Choi? Now look, this commission shouldn't be approving any donations to fund the tuition and travel of cops traveling anywhere, especially for human trafficking summit sponsored by Motorola and Vigilant Solutions, corporations that profit from the surveillance and criminalization of sex workers. All travel by the LAPD should have been halted after your top cop, Musty Mike, created an international embarrassment when his goons detained an innocent man in Marseille. Now, last week, T-Stank was going through how y'all put into place a system for virtual comment to remain as the commission is preparing for the inevitable return to in-person meetings. I know that keeps you up at night, Briggs. So while we wait on y'all to take the lead from City Council, since you can't make your own decisions, it makes sense for y'all to let us speak on agenda items in order instead of allowing people to give public comment before you discuss those agenda items. That seems logical, doesn't it? Briggs, as a lawyer, what if you were only allowed to provide commentary at the start of a trial instead of being able to ask questions and provide commentary after witnesses and evidence had been presented? Especially as you've been exposed, especially as you've been exposed for limiting public comment, I want to say stop saying you provide 45 minutes of public comment when it's really only 40 minutes or 15 callers, or as it was last week, only 36 minutes and 29 seconds. And finally, Soboroff, you said on Twitter that you're part of the middle ground action taken by the police commission. What middle ground are you talking about, Stevie? I mean, I know you're used to being near the ground with all the bootlicking you do. Is the middle ground you're talking about purgatory? Because you're definitely going to hell.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Matios, followed by Hamid Khan.
Hello.
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you. First off, I kind of want to combat this narrative that the Human Trafficking Task Force, this is really just the criminalizing and policing of sex workers under the guise of rescue, and under this false narrative of human trafficking that's really not going on. The LAPD is just using surveillance tactics and teaming up with corporations like Celebrate, like Jason was just saying, to criminalize poor sex workers. And frankly, I felt this when the LAPD was kind of honoring International Women's Day. I don't think the LAPD should really be a force or an authority in the safekeeping of women when they have such a history of sexual violence. And you can find this history in a timeline at stoplapdspying.org. but that's never been addressed. And it seems disingenuous to kind of praise, honor, venerate women through an LAPD platform when there's just so much violence that's been enacted by LAPD officers. And next, I want to talk about the OIS report. So the LAPD has killed at least 90 people in the last 6 years by shooting them. This type of, I guess, auditing or oversight of shootings is a sham, right? We haven't seen killings decline. The LAPD is the most murderous police department. And it's really interesting who the LAPD classifies as an armed person and who they justify killing. There's an inherent criminality in how they list these killings alone. So yeah, just to show that the LAPD can't be regulated, it needs to be abolished, it can't be reformed. And lastly, I want to touch on, now Briggs, I know you like to cut off black callers, but I'm not attacking another caller. I'm just referencing another caller citing August Vollmer as a father of policing from Berkeley. And while he was from Berkeley, he was actually chief of police here in Los Angeles as well. Interesting thing about Vollmer, he was a registered eugenicist. He was like a national member of the Eugenicist Society. And when forming the curriculum for police officers, actually included eugenicist texts. So I don't know that that really sanitizes and professionalizes the image of policing in the same way that you think it does. And yeah, I also want to talk about Dominic Choi using the phrase gaining ground. I think that really speaks to just the counterinsurgency mindset that's so ingrained within policing and that we see everywhere else. It was perpetuated like by people like August Vollmer, but by police to this day. And we see that in the violence. It really is like, it is a military occupation of our communities. And that's evident in the way, these police officers speak. Anyway, this.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Hamid Khan, followed by Adam. Hamid, you're on.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, hi. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them?
Okay, 3 minutes.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak really quickly about the different SWAT shooting corps as well, which, I mean, as a police force and as even just last month, the amount of murders that LAPD has done, also refusing the ways in which y'all utilize the entire team of comms to be able to create certain language, such as like officer involved shootings, or how you talked about unhoused folks as well-equipped people experiencing homelessness, which just shows you the absurd amount of funds and resources that goes to LAPD to fund pensions, to fund different programs that continue to harm, criminalize, and banish our communities. And so I wanted to speak a lot about, like, as y'all are talking about celebrating Women's Month, that's just a farce, and just as a reminder as well, like, y'all are trying to criminalize and are actively criminalizing sex workers under the guise of child trafficking and human trafficking, which does nothing to protect folks that are going through that violence. And so I want to just spend time as well to acknowledge the fact that these are all the police youth programs that were disbanded or suspended following sexual assault and harassment of youth or subordinate officers. So Signal Hill in California was disbanded. The Explorer Post in 1983. Long Beach disbanded the programs in the 1980s, then reformed in 1997, and has since been under investigation for numerous instances of abuse. Irwindale, California disbanded a program in 2014. Fox Hill, Illinois disbanded as well, program in 2015. And so those are just a few programs that we're aware of, but we know that this happens every so often. It happens every year. We also know from your own disciplinary information that you release that there are folks that even as early as December of last year, have instead of seeing any forms of disciplinary, were instead allowed to retire early. And so that also speaks to the number of folks that continue to do harm the communities in their own in their own homes, and then as well have the power to be able to do this and leash this types of violence in our communities. The amount of survivors that don't even get to report, or when they do report, are oftentimes met with the same patriarchal, cis, hetero, white supremacist patriarchy that continues to be the direct point as well of.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Adam, followed by Q Jean-Marie.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
I'll speak on all of them today, Becky. Thanks.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Good morning, commissioners. Yes, sometimes just for fun, I find myself perusing the City of LA's Next Request website, looking through the vast number of California Public Records Act requests, particularly ones that are requested from the LAPD. Now, we all know, if you've been here over the years, that it's no surprise that Commissioner Sobroff functions as an intermediary for donations coming through the LA Police Commission. But it's still notable, as he's been on his commission since 2013, and if this is his continuing function as a commissioner, it's worth speaking to. In July 2020, he received an email from Tom Penn that says, "Steve, thank you for leading the way on the Los Angeles Police Foundation initiative to protect our officers and simultaneously offer an important community outreach program." Steve then forwards the email as an FYI to LA Police Foundation Executive Director Dana Katz, and Katz then forwards to Chief Moore saying, and I quote, "Steve has mentioned that this project might be happening," end quote. On August 3rd that year, Chief Moore wrote to the LA Police Foundation Board Chair Jeff New and Assistant Chief Dominic Choi, in fact, but he wrote in the language of Chief Moore, so bear with me as I work through his grammar. "We would like to pursue the acceptance of a donation from a couple different philanthropy to support the production of custom designed face coverings for child and adults." He continues, "I believe the funding raised is approximately $100,000. Commissioner Soboroff has the info. Please let me know the path forward. Mike." These are specifically for masks to give out to the public, and while that seems pretty innocuous, it's been very well documented how little the LAPD cares about the public with regard to COVID, and this was sold, and I quote, as an important community outreach program. So in the face of an LAPD who, again, has shown their disdain for the community with regard to COVID, it's obviously meant as, more of a propaganda tool than it has anything to do with public safety coming from this department. I know the board doesn't care too much about this stuff, but the public should know about how this board actually functions when they call themselves the citizen's voice in police affairs. Because I, as a citizen, am not out, facilitating donations to the LAPD and calling myself oversight. So anyway, if anyone wants to read these emails, I'm going to send them over to the LAPC Fails Coalition, of which I am a proud member, and we'll be posting the emails on Twitter at LAPC Fails. Quickly, I want to speak to the Chief's report. Hey, Assistant Chief Choi, just want to congratulate you again on your promotion to Assistant Chief in December. After decades on the job, it was quite noticeable that your first public role as Assistant Chief was being front and center, speaking at a press conference defending the LAPD murder of a 14-year-old child. Hope you and your family are proud of your career. Congrats again and have a great day.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Q Jean-Marie, followed by Zach Sherwin.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
I'd like to speak on all of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Yes. By the way, modern policing did emerge out of slave catching. We're not just talking, we've got receipts. This is not an opinion. Now, related to crime, in 1965, the McCone Commission identified the root causes of the riots to be high unemployment, poor schools, and related inferior living conditions that were endured by African Americans in Watts. So yes, poverty does breed crime, to the experts who don't live in the ghetto but always speaking to it. I attributed the riots to the in 1967 with the Kerner Commission. It said it attributed the riots of 1967, we had 1965, now we got 1967, to the lack of economic opportunities for African Americans and Latinos, failed social service programs, police brutality, racism, and an orientation of national media to white perspective. That is on page 426 of the bestseller Kerner Commission in Lyndon Johnson's administration. Now, the commission also said our nation is moving towards two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. The report was strong, it had a strong indictment of white America, said what white Americans have never failed to fully understood, but what the Negro never forgets is that white society is deeply implicated in the ghetto, saying that it not only created it, but it maintains it. Now in 1991, with the Rodney King uprising, right? It began, it says, when a jury acquitted 4 officers from the Los Angeles Police Department charged with using excessive force in the arrest and beating of Rodney King. And again, our society moved into 2 different societies, one unequal, one white, one black. Last Thursday, March 3rd, was the 31st anniversary of Rodney King. And we're still dealing with a lot of these issues with your pretextual stop. So what you need to do, what you guys need to do is stop it, right? Quit trying to dance around the issues and deal with the issues. And one of the things LAPD should be doing is actually advocating for housing for our people, right? Poverty does breed crime. When you're receiving almost 50% of the unrestricted budget, and then you're saying you need a larger force, when are you going to help the entire city focus on housing? We need housing. With that, I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Zach Sherwin, followed by EP.
Oh, good morning. I'd like to speak to all the items.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay. I'd like to begin by thanking you for the ample time that we have for public comment. 45 minutes is definitely always enough. So thank you so much. Commissioners, you are running out of room to hide behind not having meetings in person. And I attribute this to cowardice. And I don't mean that you're scared of getting COVID. I think that you are scared of being face-to-face with the people who call in. And I think that fear is justified on your part because you know that you're up to some bullshit and it's more difficult to be a condescending asshole, just like from a human primate, sociological, we're all social animals kind of level. It's more difficult to be the kind of, let's say like voice repressing, debate stifling, condescending assholes that you manage to be on this meeting when you can shut people up at the touch of a button. Though I'm sure that some of you, looking at you, Commissioner Briggs, looking at you, Commissioner Soberoff, will manage to achieve those same levels that you attain here in the meetings. LA is a showbiz town, so I'll ask you all to get into character a little bit. Just imagine that you are a concerned citizen who read an article that ran in the Times on Sunday entitled, "Catastrophic Failure, How the LAPD Blew Up a Neighborhood." And then imagine that you'd heard whispers of the LA Police Commission's existence. I mean, they meet on Tuesday mornings, which is just a ridiculous time for almost everybody's schedule, but you know that they exist, maybe because of the time that they got chewed out by the public so badly that they were on John Oliver because Chief Moore was told to choke on a collar's cock. Anywho, you show up at the meeting on Zoom to check it out because these are the people who oversee the LAPD. And so an average newbie might think if the LAPD failed catastrophically, maybe the people who are in charge of overseeing their success and failure would utter so much as a syllable about what again was described as a catastrophic failure. Instead, we get nothing. Though I will say that I did miss the first few minutes of the meeting, so if you talked about this, Assistant Chief Choi, please strike the above comments. Item 3C, what are these $16,000 in promotional items? I opened up the item on the agenda to see if it went into more detail, and it just continues to say promotional items all the way down. Are they beer koozies or stress balls or perhaps a pen of some kind? Why would you not specify? And how can these cops be squealing, and I use that term advisedly, about being defunded when these just like unexplained donations are rolling in as a matter so routine that they aren't even itemized in any way on the agenda? The person who cited August Vollmer is a racist. I yield the rest of my time.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have EP followed by Javier.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yeah, I wanted, I guess, to kind of piggyback what Pastor Q earlier said, which is, all of the studies, all of the reports that are not produced by police have shown, right? The science, the data shows that the way that you are doing things right now is not working, and throwing more money into policing does not address the root cause of the problem. And yet, every single day, you continue to make the same mistake time and time and time again. The callers that are calling you who are anti-COVID basically are the types of opinions that you are all kind of upholding. And by you, I mean people on the commission, by refusing to look at what works and what doesn't work. And I find it kind of funny, find it kind of sad that you can't see what's directly in front of you, right? That the people that support you are the ones that are against the science, the ones that are against the facts, right? They're the ones who are against the masks, and they're the ones who are against the vaccines. And you probably think, well, these people are, well, we don't agree with that, but yet you're doing the same exact thing on the commission. The commission, half of the people on the commission have no business being on the commission. Briggs, Steve, find something better to do with your lives, because you are destroying communities and you're not helping. And I hope that gets through to you, because hopefully it does get through to you, because eventually there will be a steep consequence to pay for not doing what's right and not listening to the public and not doing anything that in any meaningful way addresses the problem. The sex work thing, Mike, how many people that you arrested during Super Bowl week were actual traffic people? I would imagine a vast majority were just sex workers trying to make ends meet, and you basically criminalized and made their lives even more horrible and even more difficult. So you should pat yourself on the back for absolutely doing nothing and spending taxpayer money in the process. I think that is a good kind of demonstration of just how harmful and useless policing is. Yeah, I hope you all find God. And to the person, real quick before I log off, who like earlier mentioned Christ and crime. Everything Christ was doing and all the people that Christ was hanging out with were criminals, and Christ was ultimately murdered for a crime, something that was illegal. Crime does not equal righteous or ethical.
Okay, thank you. And next we have Javier.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Hi, yes, what items would you
Okay,
like to
good.
speak on?
Yeah, I want to speak on item, the last one about discipline cases. And I also want to ask a question. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, do you have attendance rules, within your little caucus of commissioners? Because once again, Commissioner Calanche is not a party to this. And there seems to be a reoccurring theme. I know, because I'm on these meetings every single week and involved in other areas, with the department. And I know it's a tremendous burden, to spend almost an entire day, every week. But when you come on board, that's the commitment that you make. And, Latinos are 50% of the population in Los Angeles. Yet we're only 20% of the representation, here on the commission. And, we just don't have a strong voice. And I know it was the mayor's decision, but, she's absent once again. And as you're determining policy and addressing issues that affect everybody, but certainly the 50% of us that make up Los Angeles, I don't know if you, Mr. Chairman, can have the authority or the willingness to address that with the commissioner, because we need somebody there who's willing to do the job full time. And the other point that I wanted to address is I kind of rolled with this issue and the discipline of police officers who didn't get vaccinated. I did boards of arrest for 15 years, I think maybe even more, and I understand the process, et cetera. But I would ask each of you to please remember that the science on this whole COVID thing, vaccines and everything else, has been all over the map. And a lot of it's political. Where did it originate? Well, we shouldn't say Wuhan because it offends the Chinese. But it's hard to recruit police officers and to keep them in line, keep them motivated, et cetera. And now that we're sort of going back to normal, I don't excuse that they didn't, stand up, follow the rules. But to lose that many officers from an event that we still really don't know what happened, and we're now starting to see after effects from some of these COVID shots. I got all mine, and so did my wife. But for police officers, it's a different world, and it takes a long time to train them, to retain them, to keep them, doing the job in a hard environment. And I would ask you to please reconsider that move. The science was all over the map. We still don't know what really happened. And I think we should, in the best interest of the city and the protection and the future recruiting, reconsider your decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. President, there are no other speakers.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. At this time, we will go to item 3 on the agenda, the consent agenda items. Do any commissioners want to pull out any of the consent agenda items and discuss those? Seeing none, no. I move that we adopt all of item 3. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. At this time, we'll go to item 4A on the agenda, the department's report with respect to the overview of all officer-involved shootings in 2021. Can we have Captain Scott Williams come up, please?
Good morning, commissioners.
Good morning, Captain. Thank you. The commissioners have read your report, but would you please go ahead and summarize it for us?
Absolutely, thank you. So in February, the City Council's Public Safety Committee directed the department to analyze officer-involved shooting incidents in 2021, including the status timeline and findings of non-compliance with the use of force policy, as compared to the findings from the previous 5 years. The report provided here contains statistics from 2016 through 2021 and includes total OIS numbers, OIS incidents resulting in fatalities, and the dispositions of lethal force applications. It also provides a snapshot of weapons used by subjects of force and officers in the 2021 OIS incidents, as well as the investigative status of the 37 OIS cases from 2021. So rather than going through the entire analysis, I'll just touch on a few key points and then take any questions you may have, if that's okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so in 2021, there were 37 officer-involved shooting incidents. That represented an increase of 3 incidents over the previous 5-year average. The percentages of OIS incidents with hits, as well as OIS incidents resulting in fatalities in 2021 were also slightly higher than the previous 5-year average. Now, with regard to the adjudication of lethal force, roughly 21% or 7 incidents per year between 2016 and 2020 resulted in an out-of-policy finding for at least 1 application of lethal force. Now, since all 2021 cases have not received final adjudication by this commission, the data is incomplete for 2021. But so far this year, there have been, well, at the time of this report was generated, there have been 4 cases that had been presented to the commission for adjudication, one of which resulted in an out of policy finding for an application of lethal force. Also, with regard to officers receiving administrative disapproval findings for lethal force, the average number of officers in any given year who receive a finding for a lethal force application is 58. The average number of officers per year who receives an out of policy finding for an application of lethal force is 11. So far this year, and again, this is as of the writing of this report at the end of January, only 1 officer had received a lethal force finding of the 4 cases that had been presented to this commission for adjudication. I want to talk just briefly about some statistical anomalies that we saw in 2021 versus prior years, and that's specifically related to the weapons that are used by subjects of force in these officer-involved shootings. Generally, about 58% of cases in years prior had involved subjects who were armed with firearms, and only about 7.5% or so involved subjects who were armed with edged weapons. In 2021, those numbers shifted fairly dramatically. Of the 37 officer-involved shootings in 2021, only 15 of them involved subjects with firearms. So that's about 41% or so, whereas 14 of them involved subjects armed with edged weapons, which is 41%, which was a significant increase over not just the previous 5 years, but in looking back over the last 10 years. As the chief has mentioned in prior meetings, there has been some shifting in the department's training with regard to contacts with subjects armed with edged weapons, and training to allow for the use of more less lethal options, and to allow those less lethal options to work, as well as some shifts in policy with regard to command and control, specifically related to the designation of cover officers in these incidents. So far this year, in terms of our adjudication of cases, again, at the time of this report, 4 of our 37 OIS cases had been presented to this commission for adjudication. There had been 2 additional cases that were presented to the chief of police for recommendations, but we're awaiting police commission adjudications. And then another 5 cases that were presented to the use of force review board that had yet to been presented to the chief or to the commission for adjudication. I can go over, if you'd like, commissioners, just for context purposes, the manner in which officer-involved shooting incidents are investigated in terms of the timeline, or I can open it up to questions for you now if you'd like.
Would you go over that, Captain Williams, because I understand that that was of concern to members of the city council as well.
Correct. Yeah. So from the time an officer-involved shooting incident occurs, FID is the primary investigating entity there. And so from the time of the incident, they have roughly 8 months to complete their investigation and submit their report to Critical Incident Review Division for our review, and then preparation for that case to go before the Use of Force Review Board. So once CIRD receives that case, we have no more than 1 month to review it, analyze it, and then again prepare the case for presentation to the Use of Force Review Board. The Use of Force Review Board generally occurs about 9 months after the officer-involved shooting. And then following the board, CIRD has no more than 1 month to prepare the Chief of Police correspondence to the Board of Police Commissioners outlining his recommended findings. The cases are then presented to the commission for adjudication, and that is done no less than 30 days prior to the statute date. So it's important that these cases receive final adjudication at least 1 month prior to statute. So any discipline that comes as a result of a finding has its way to work through the system.
Thank you, Captain Williams. Captain Williams, I do have a question. I noticed that in the analysis that was presented, there was no attempt to determine whether or not any of the individuals who, say, for example, were with edged weapons may have had issues with mental health, or, for lack of a better word, had asked the officers to shoot them. Is this because the city council did not request that particular information, or you didn't believe that this was part of the department's job to determine the mental status of the individual involved in the OIS?
Yes, Commissioner, it was not included in this report because it was not asked for by the city council. However, that analysis has been completed. As you know, that in the next couple of weeks, the department will be presenting the year-end review from 2021 with all use of force incidents from 2021 to include nuances such as contacts with those experiencing mental illness. And just anecdotally, I'll tell you that between CIRD and FID in the last couple of weeks, we have been in discussions regarding how to accurately account for contacts with those experiencing mental illness. As it stands now, statistically, we rely on prior MEU contacts as a determining factor whether or not the subject was experiencing a mental health illness, or whether we stat it that way. But we recognize that that does leave out a subset of our contacts involving individuals who may just not have either had prior contacts with the department or the department's mental evaluation unit, or may be experiencing a sudden onset of mental health crisis that had either gone previously diagnosed. And so we want to make sure that additional investigative avenues, such as officer's perspective or interviews with family members who may have some additional information regarding a subject's mental health status, is included so that we accurately and adequately capture those numbers.
Thank you, Captain. At this time, I'm going to turn to the other commissioners to see whether or not they have any questions. Commissioner Soberoff? No. Commissioner Bonner?
Yeah, just a couple, please. One question, just stepping back in terms of the departments. I know you're producing information in response to a request from the council, but can you also comment on the department's efforts and process for reviewing and making any judgments along the way? In other words, do you, when you look at potential needs for increased training or de-escalation, any of those kind of things, I know some of that is done on a case-by-case basis with tactical debriefs and things of that nature. But can you comment on how this kind of information in the aggregate informs the department's thinking in that regard?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we use all of the statistics that we gather as a result of these incidents to shape the department's training. I spoke a little bit about the anomaly we saw in 2021 with regard to our officers' contacts with individuals with edged weapons, and the increase in our officer-involved shooting incidents as a result of that. And so the department used that information to develop training that focused on that and focused on our officers' response to their contacts with those individuals. Again, we look at things not just from a force perspective, but from a tactical perspective. When we see, deviations from standard, tactical policies or practices, we adjust our training as a department to ensure that the officers in the field are up to date with not only the changes in law and changes in policy, but the expectations of the department with regard to their handling of certain situations. One thing that comes to mind most recently is the issues of rendering aid. That was something that was placed into state law and our use of force policy fairly recently, and it's important that we use what we're seeing from the adjudication process of these officer-involved shootings to inform our officers of what the expectation is of them.
I appreciate that. One thing I'd ask you to consider, and this is probably maybe if you have a comment now, that'd be certainly appreciated, but otherwise you might consider it in connection with the upcoming use of force report that you just alluded to. And that is a question I've attempted to ask in the past, perhaps not in the correct way, but I'm always curious to understand or better understand the correlation between any of the additional training on the one hand and improved outcomes on the other. So you mentioned, for example, the concern about the increased number of cases involving edge weapons and the additional training that in that regard. I recall some of that as well. But also then the question is, at what point do you step back and try to determine whether or not the training has been effective? So is there some correlation between increased training efforts on the one hand and the outcomes that are being achieved on the other? So that's one example, but that's just a question I think across the board is how the department, how does the department assess, particularly with regard to use of force generally, but OISs, that correlation. So can you comment briefly now, and then maybe, as I said, it may be something that we can talk a little bit about more when the report comes out.
Yeah. So I appreciate.
I could jump in here real quick, Scott. Commissioner Bonner, I think so. The lack of or avoidance of any categorical force incident, I think, is ultimately the best outcome. And over time, you'd see a pattern of the reduction. But we don't want to see that, right? We don't want to wait for a period of time and analyze these categorical incidents to see if our training is being effective. We're trying to reduce or stop these type of incidents to the best of our ability. One thing that we do with these 72-hour briefs for categorical type incidents is we do it's quick and it's right after the incident, is we do an assessment of the incident itself. What are the immediate tactical concerns, community concerns, things that we have to address internally? What do we do with the officers involved in these incidents? Do they go back out in the field? Do they stay inside an administrative position until more training is provided? All these things happen right after an incident. And so we can identify quickly as they unfold if there's any training or needs that the department needs to provide. Now, again, like I said, over a period of time, we can see a pattern or trend if these incidents decrease or the way these officers are handling these incidents start to shift, meaning more time, more cover, more distance is being used. All these things that we're training for in our de-escalation training, procedural justice, getting compliance, waiting for clinicians to show up. Those type of things, when we see those in these briefings, we know that what we are training, the officers are implementing. And we can do it real time with these quick briefs after these incidents.
So, and I appreciate that. And I think I was aware at least of much of that. And I just go back again to the main point that I'm trying to better understand. And again, that is when you think about, the training you described, it's one thing to look at it on a case-by-case basis. But let's just put it this way. You think over the last 7 or 8 years, you've had, body-worn video. You've had a lot of emphasis on de-escalation, a lot of emphasis on edge weapons, now we're at mental health, all these various things. And one might, assume that one, I think, oversimplified view would be, oh, you're doing all this increased training, these increased efforts. So those OISs and use of force and things would go down, that there would be a positive correlation between the additional training and the additional effort on the one hand and the number of incidents, on the other. I say that's oversimplified because there's a lot of things that drive any particular incident and the rest. And that's hence my question is how does the department, or how does even the profession for that matter, really look at the ultimate impact of a lot of the new efforts that are that are being made? That's still a question in my mind, as I said, because you just take the examples that I gave over the last several years that have been implemented. And when I look at the data here, I don't know that I'd say that we're seeing a dramatic decline. And I know there was a couple of years where things were, went down, but, they come back up and for various reasons and so on. But then when you get into the quality of each of the decisions and so on, it's still, a question in my mind whether one can look and say, boy, we're really seeing a positive impact because we have a reduced number of incidents in which X, Y, or Z happen. And that appears to be because of this additional training or this additional tool or what have you. So again, I don't want to take up all the time here today on this, but I would ask for, will guarantee that I'll be asking again when we have the use of force report coming up. So any help that you can give, one, if the question's not properly framed, appreciate knowing that. If it is properly framed, then great. Let's talk about how we might answer it to give some examples of where we've attributed some improved data to some action that was taken by the department or the commission.
No, I understand your question, Commissioner. And as we move closer towards the presentation of the year-end review, I'll be certain to do some more research into that and hopefully have some quantifiable information for you at that time.
Appreciate that. The other question that I had quickly, I think, is maybe for the Inspector General, actually. And that the question is, I know this topic is relating to the request that came from the council, but I recall that you're also have a review underway that looking, I believe, at the comparison of the chief's determinations and the commission's determinations. But that's really the question is, can you comment briefly on whether or not the data that we're looking at here has any relationship to the scope of work that you're engaged in?
Thank you, Commissioner Bonner. Yes, there is a bit of overlap for sure in some of the data that the department presented today. However, our report, which is forthcoming, and we were just awaiting a date on the commission's calendar to present that, does include a number of other data points as well. I won't go into them now. We'll wait for our presentation, but to say it very briefly, we were requested by this commission to report on officer-involved shooting incidents in particular that were found to be out of policy, as well as the number of such incidents that involve weapons other than firearms, the discipline issued in such incidents, as well as the results of any appeals of discipline issued in those incidents. So it's really those latter categories that I mentioned that I think are additional data points to what was presented today, and we look forward to bringing that to the commission.
Sure, appreciate that. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Commissioner Briggs.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonner. At this time, there being no further questions, I move that we approve the department's report and transmit it to the Public Safety Committee of the City Council. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you very much. At this time, we're going to go into closed session. Thank you, everyone.
Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss agenda items 5A1 and 5A2 in accordance with Government Code 54957.
I believe we're waiting on Ms. Farber. Ms. Farber, thank you. Can you report out of closed session? But before you do, I believe there's a correction on the record from the last session from last week.
Yes. It was brought to the attention of the executive director that the reporting out of closed session 6A1 OIS number 014-21 on March 1st, 2022 was incorrect. The report out was less lethal use of force in policy, 1 police officer 3, and should be 1 police officer 1.
Thank you, Ms. Farber. Can you report out of today's closed session, please?
Yes. At the regular meeting of the Board of Police Commissioners, March 8th, 2022, during closed session, the board adjudicated officer-involved shooting, OIS number 018-21, and adopted the chief's recommendations as follows. Tactics, administrative disapproval, 1 police officer 3, 2 police officer 2. Tactical debrief, 1 lieutenant 1, 1 sergeant 1, 1 police officer 3, 2 police officer 2, and 1 police officer 1. For drawing and exhibiting, no policy, in policy, no further action, 2 police officer 3, 4 police officer 2, and 1 police officer 1. For lethal use of force, in policy, no further action, 1 police officer 2. At the board adjudicated involved shooting case number 019-21 and adopted the chief's recommendations for tactics, administrative disapproval, 1 sergeant 1, 3 police officer 3s, tactical debrief, 1 police officer 3, for drawing and exhibiting, in policy, no further action, 1 sergeant 1, 1 police officer 3, 3 police officer 2, non-lethal use of force, in policy, no further action, 1 police officer 2, lethal use of force, in policy, no further action, 2 police officer 2.
Is that it, Ms. Farber?
Yes, it is, Commissioner Briggs.
Thank you very much. At this time, there being no further business before the Board of Police Commissions, I move that we adjourn.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone. See you next week. Have a great day. Stay safe.